Hi, 492 students. Welcome to week 5. So we aren't meeting today, obviously. We will plan to offer the face-to-face option next week during week 6. We'll see how many people attend, and then we'll figure out from there what we're doing in terms of face-to-face or Zoom attendance for the next few weeks. And regarding the project information, if your group changes your agency or your evidence-based program or your population, please go ahead and resubmit the project information so that Lauren and I have kind of an easy record, quick record of what you all are doing that we can refer to. Lastly, I've gotten a couple of questions about whether or not you should design your programs to be COVID specific or not, and I will leave that up to you. If you want to design them around COVID in terms of, online delivery or social distancing, you can do that. And if you'd prefer to pretend that COVID doesn't exist because maybe it will be not so much of an issue by the time you would get funding and roll out your program, that's completely fine as well. All right, so here's what's due this week. There aren't any individual assignments, but you do have the 2 group assignments, the needs assessment draft and the target population draft. And we'll be going over those assignments in this PowerPoint. And then just to keep it on your radar, your team meeting notes number 3 are due not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. And so if you are meeting this week and you want to get ahead on those team meeting notes, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, so just to remind you, there are 12 sections of the grant proposal, and we are talking about 2 or 3 of them each week typically, and then you're writing anywhere between 1 and 3 of them each week. Cover page actually comes at the end, so we'll come back to that. We've already covered agency information and problem statement, and so now we're covering the needs assessment and the target population. A friendly reminder that when you're working on these proposal drafts, they shouldn't be rough drafts. You want to try to have it be completely final from your perspective, that you've met all the information requirements, that you've edited it carefully. We'll be grading it as if it's the final submission. So if you are still locating information, like you don't have a number, then feel free to insert the sentence as if you had it and just put like an X or a symbol in the spot where you're going to put the number in. All right, let's get started on the needs assessment. So these are the 4 components of the needs assessment that I'm going to go through. How to give a sense of the issue locally, addressing this kind of gap in the programming that exists and what's needed, addressing the demand, which is the if you build it, will they come to your program piece, and then giving a snapshot of your evidence-based program. So just to orient you to what the needs assessment is about, it's about your local community, essentially. So in the problem statement, you informed your the funders that you're applying to about how the problem exists nationally, what are the causes and consequences of the problem, how we can, address risk and protective factors. Now what you're doing in the needs assessment is basically explaining what the problem looks like in your community and the importance of doing something now at this time. So here's the requirements for the needs assessment section, and we'll talk about more of these in detail. So you're going to give some local statistics that you cite. You're also going to identify 2 consequences of the problem in the local community, and you're going to try to find evidence of these consequences or the amount of people kind of experiencing these consequences in our community and cite that. You're going to have a gap statement that describes the current services at the agency or in the community and how those are inadequate given the need. You're also going to have a demand statement that estimates either how many could use the program if possible, and we'll talk more about that in target population, how to estimate or addresses how typical barriers will be removed, and we'll talk more about that. And then a brief introduction of the evidence-based program, basically structure, not the research behind it, but the structure. Okay, so local scope. This is a challenging piece to figure out what the statistics are about your problem, who's struggling with it in your local community. And so I do recommend that you take a look at the library session number 3, Finding Local Stats document, and it also has links to another library page which helps you find kind of local stats, but I do agree that this is challenging. After you establish a sense of the amount of people locally who are struggling with your problem, now you want to sound like you're an expert in terms of what's offered in the community in terms of services and what is needed. And so you're trying to convince your potential funder, that there's a gap facing this population, that we have more people struggling with this problem than are able to get services. And so for this, you do have to kind of have some expertise as to what programs are available in your local community, because funders don't want to pay for something that already exists or isn't needed. So this is where maybe some of those agency investigation worksheets with other agencies that you didn't decide to pretend were your own, as your own agency, might give you a sense of what else exists. And so you can revisit, those investigations that you did early on. You can also, if you've still got some holes, conduct an extra credit community contact interview to get some information about what a specific agency, a different agency, is offering in terms of programming. So here's an example. If the area was emotional well-being in older adults, you would be maybe saying that we've got programs, services, and opportunities for older adults, and you could review those. And maybe we also have program services and other opportunities that address mental health and emotional well-being, and you could mention some of those. But now you're trying to say basically, but we don't have programs that are specifically geared towards enough older adults and their emotional well-being. Or you could be bringing up other ways that there are gaps, which we'll go over. So here's some common gaps to look for. There's, again, like I said, lots of programs for older adults, but none of them are specifically geared towards mental health. Or there are a number of programs in the community geared towards mental health, but none of them specifically target older adults as a unique kind of population. Or there are some programs like what we're proposing, but there's not enough, or they're missing some key component that the research says would be beneficial. Or another one, and it could be combinations of these, there are programs like this, but there are barriers, either the cost, the location, the time of day, or transportation, that your program is going to remedy. So here's some questions you could ask in the community contact interview. Things like, what types of therapy or treatment do you provide? And again, this is where you're asking other agencies in town, not your agency, that also serves your population. What previous programs have you tried, and why are they not still running? What needs for additional programs do you see? What other agencies does your agency work with? Who else serves this population? You could describe your problem, and then ask that you're focusing on, and ask what the agency has done to try to address this issue. You could describe the program that you're proposing and ask if they exist elsewhere, or if anyone has asked for a program like yours, which is getting at the demand in addition to the gap. So you may establish a gap and build this great program, but what if nobody shows up? So, which all of us have experienced who have been in the helping professional field for a long time. So how do you have a sense that if you build it, they will come? And so again, you're going to be estimating how many could use the program, and we'll talk more about that. And then you're going to be talking about how you're going to remove any possible barriers or minimize those barriers as much as possible. Here's an example of a gap and demand statement. So every year there are approximately 250 births to girls between the ages of 10 and 19 in Larimer County. Yet the number served at Fort Collins High School, which has a maximum capacity of 50, reflects less than 20% of pregnant and parenting teens in Larimer County. All of the teens in need are not able to enroll at the program due to limited funding for the program. Oh, sorry. And so then that first part, let me just pause, is the gap, right? What is needed versus what exists. Now we're getting more into demand. All of the teens in need are not able to enroll at the program due to limited funding. So the inconvenience of transferring to a new school and transportation conflicts. There are approximately 30 to 40 students on a waiting list. If you can, that's really getting at the demand. We have people who want and are waiting for this program and have said that they're waiting for it. And then lastly, you're going to provide a snapshot of your evidence-based program. So you introduced kind of the research basis for your evidence-based program in the problem statement and talked about the risk and protective factors that it addresses. Now you're going to give your reader a little bit of a sense of the structure of your evidence-based program. You know, what is it? Is it a summer camp? Is it a, weekly workshop? Is it a weekend intensive training? Is it an online psychoeducational program, right? So you're kind of basically explaining what the format is, what the length is, and typically how many people are served at a time within the evidence-based program, if this kind of makes sense, and how many times it might typically be offered in a year. We're going to get more into this in the target population, so you can kind of use your judgment here. But again, you're just giving like, one or two sentences. And then you're going to finish with a so what sort of summary statement. So you've hopefully convinced the funder already that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. That was in the problem statement. And then you've hopefully in this needs assessment convinced the funder that it's in your community and there aren't, kind of the right services to address it. And now you're trying to kind of give this sense of what would happen if we offered it or we didn't offer it. And you're trying not to be super dramatic, but you're also kind of trying to drive the point home. So here's an example of a so what conclusion that kind of drives the point home and also mentions the program as well. So being able to offer program ABC in the next year will allow us to fill important gaps in services for LGBT youth in our community. Recent surveys tell us that nearly half of youth who identify as LGBT report persistent feelings of loneliness and isolation and are at much higher risk for suicide. Given the track record of program ABC, we have a real opportunity to help more of these youth feel connected and accepted in our local community. So as you're writing the needs assessment, there's a number of different resources that you might be consulting. The course workbook has more detail. Sample proposals give you a sense of what this section should look like. The proposal checklist, which is also the rubric, tells you what to make sure you have in this section. The library session number 3, finding local stats, handout, video, and then corresponding web page is really useful. Your old agency investigation worksheets, if you talk to your agency or other agencies about programming, will be useful. Your evidence-based program investigation worksheets will help you kind of fill in details about your evidence-based program, and then any community contact interviews you have conducted or do conduct as you're writing the needs assessment. Okay, so let's move on to the target population, which is who you're going to be targeting with your evidence-based program. Who will you be serving? Okay, so when you're deciding who your target population is, you're kind of answering these 3 questions. Who is it that has this problem or the issue? Who does your evidence-based program target? And who is served by your agency? Before you go too much further in thinking about your target population, you do have to have a sense of what type of program your evidence-based program is. And so you can do this by, searching. Well, actually, I'll talk more about how to figure it out. Okay, so there's 3 types of evidence-based programs. There's universal programs where everybody is appropriate to attend this program regardless of their level of risk. And you can look at that through the blueprint at the Blueprint's positive action link here and see them noted as a universal program. Or it could be a selective program. For these programs, the target population are those that have higher than average risk for the problem. For example, a substance abuse prevention program might target youth that have a family history of substance abuse, regardless of whether or not the individual youth is already engaging in the behavior. So trying to find a group that might have higher risk. So an example of a selective program is the Blueprint's program for functional family therapy, and you could check that out and see that it's listed as a selective program. And then an example of an indicated program are for individuals that are experiencing the issue or the problem. So they are already struggling with substance use. They have already experienced trauma. So for example, the Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools program is designed specifically for those that have already experienced a traumatic event. And so it's important to note that you might be asking yourself, could I use a universal evidence-based program more selectively, or could I use an indicated program more universally? And here's the basic rule. You can use a universal evidence-based program as a more selective or indicated program. So you could use a prevention program that's designed for anyone and decide to choose the population that's most at risk or is already experiencing the problem. However, you can't use an indicated evidence-based program as a universal program. So you couldn't use, for example, the Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools, CBITS program, with everyone in the school system because it's specifically designed for people who have already had trauma. It may be addressing past trauma, and so then it wouldn't be appropriate for people who didn't have that history. Okay, so here's the requirements of the target population section. We'll talk about these more in detail. So you're going to be providing some demographic characteristics of your target population. You're going to be describing your geographical area. You're going to be discussing any inclusion or exclusion criteria. Then you're going to estimate the eligible number of participants in your geographical area, and you're also then going to estimate how many of those you could potentially serve during the program. Sometimes you can serve everyone and sometimes you can't. And then you're going to describe any specific action steps you have if you get too many people interested or not enough people interested. Okay, so some things to keep in mind as you're making decisions about your target population. You can't help everyone, in a pilot program. So you don't need to feel pressure to do that. And you might try to strike a balance between not being too broad, right? Like helping everyone who experiences depressive symptoms, but also not being too narrow, only helping people who experience depressive symptoms who are caring for a loved one with cancer. I mean, you could do that. That might fit, but that might be too narrow. Okay, so talking more about both demographic characteristics and inclusion and exclusion criteria, because you are often kind of describing some general characteristics that your population is going to have or will be likely to have. And then you're also going to be seeing what will allow people to be in your program or keep them from being in your program. So you may be describing their age or grade level, right, of your agency or the evidence-based program. So what ages or grades you've decided to target. You want to be mentioning language. So if your program's only offered in English, then you should specify English speakers. If you're going to be offering it in Spanish or other languages, then you would describe that. Gender, this is where you can just describe who is typically likely to be. We expect this percentage, unless there is a specific inclusion or exclusion criteria here, like you're just targeting it towards the self-esteem in girls. Income, you can either say that this is part of like an inclusion criteria, families earning less than, or families that are low income. Or you could say, typically, we expect participants to have be this level of income. Ethnicity, this could be if you're targeting a specific ethnicity, like where you're working towards supporting, Arab families in the school system, or the ethnicity that you anticipate you're going to have. If ability, if there's anything that you're targeting there, or excluding or including in terms of ability levels. So if you were doing a hiking club, you would have to require that people had that ability. Are there any agency restrictions? Like, does your agency, for example, only provide services to people who have Medicare or insurance? Or does your agency only specify these particular ages? So sometimes you're having to, again, go back to your evidence-based program serves, ages, 0 to 5, but your agency only serves 2 to 5. So that means, right, you're going to be serving ages 2 to 5. Are there any risk factors, either that you think your population is likely to have, or that will be inclusion or exclusion criteria? So are you requiring that they have depressive symptoms in order to participate, or are you excluding a clinical diagnosis of depression in order to participate? Is this for pregnant people? So do you require pregnancy in order to participate? And the last one is, do they have to be a client at your particular agency or school? So sometimes, for example, Turning Point might offer a program that's only for people who are already a part of Turning Point. Other times, however, Turning Point might often offer a community-wide program that's open to anyone in the community who's not yet associated with Turning Point. Okay, so here's an example of targeting emotional well-being in older adults. So this graphic shows how we might broaden or narrow our population depending upon how many people we estimate that exist in each of these categories in our community. So in larger communities, we could have a more narrow population and get a decent amount of attendees. But in smaller communities, we might have to have a broader population in order to get a decent amount of attendees. So the base there is the broadest, right? Any adult who's over the age of 65, or we could make it a little more narrow, is not currently in treatment for depressive symptoms or other emotional disorders. Or we could decide to choose something like one risk factor targeted by the evidence-based program, or 2 risk factors, or a subgroup that has been shown to benefit at higher levels from the evidence-based program, such as homebound older adults. So just a little bit more about, I mentioned inclusion or exclusion criteria being associated with your agency or school. So will your target population be existing clients or from the community, or both? So for example, Pathways Hospice, they offer their bereavement programs, grief counseling or grief support groups, to anybody in the community. You don't have to have been a hospice family, but they only provide their hospice or dying services to current patients and families. So you're going to be kind of deciding, is your program just for kids at this certain agency, or is it to anybody in the community that meets your criteria? Okay, so then geographical area. Is the geographical area the same as your agency serves, or, for example, is it narrower? It's unlikely to be broader, right, because your agency might have guidelines in terms of geographical area, but let's say your agency serves all of Larimer County, but you're creating a program that really targets Northeast Fort Collins. Okay, so now this kind of tricky bit of trying to estimate how many eligible participants might be out there. So if you are offering a program only for people who are already clients of your agency, then you just have to estimate how many clients at that agency meet your criteria. So let's say you're offering a program that's targeting kids who have ADHD symptoms, not necessarily maybe a diagnosis, but symptoms. So you would be doing the math, right, to go, okay, we have 200 kids in ages grades through 3, because maybe you're targeting those grades. We know that on average about 5 to 8% of kids have ADHD, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. And so we're going to estimate that we have 10 to 16 kids eligible for this program. And then you're going to be reflecting, like, is that enough? Does that make sense to run this program for just 10 to 16 kids, or do we need to make it broader? Okay, or if let's say your agency or school is offering this for anybody in the community that meet your criteria. So now you're trying to, use some of that data that you found under needs assessment, those local stats. How many adults are there over the age of 65? What percentage generally of older adults do we know from the literature report feeling depressed? What percentage generally do we know from the literature of older adults over 65 are homebound? Or if we can find that locally, great. And now we get an estimate of how many older adults in our community might be eligible. And so then you also want to be thinking, your second estimation is how many participants you're going to be able to serve during year 2. So first, let's just back up and know that generally the grants that you're going to be applying for, this is what you're going to pretend are for a year-long amount of funding. However, that's a year from when you get started, launching developing and launching the program. You're thinking you're going to get paid, your agency is going to get paid to even get the program going. You're not just getting paid for when the program is going, because otherwise you would have to be doing a lot of work for free just to get it set up. So the idea is the money comes in, let's say in January or September, and you'll be able to decide when you want to say the money's coming in. But let's say it comes in January, or actually let's go with May, because that's easier on the school system. So let's say it comes in May, and we spend the summer getting prepped for the program, and then we're going to start offering it maybe in, we're going to be recruiting in August, we're going to start offering it in September, we're going to run it through, March or April, and then we're going to spend another month kind of or so evaluating it. So generally, your program implementation might be anywhere between 6 and 10 months, not a whole year. So then you want to go back and think, okay, how long does my evidence-based program say it is? Is it 12 weeks? Is it a weekend? How many people can participate at once? And so basically, how many times can I offer it, right, during that year period? And so then that gives you a sense of how many people you could serve. And you don't want to kill yourself in terms of the amount of times you offer it. So, even if you could technically offer it, 10 times, maybe that just doesn't make sense. Maybe 4 times is more reasonable for your demand or your staffing, or maybe it is 10 times. But you also want to be thinking about like not offering it over the holidays. Late December is a slow time, right? August would be a hard time to get it started with people maybe going back to school. So summer is a hard time to get people to attend sometimes. So be kind of thinking realistically. Or you can think, how many people do I want to serve, right? And then work backwards in kind of doing the math and thinking about how many people can attend at a time and how many times you want to offer it. So here's how you might go about estimating how many your program can serve in a year. So the left side is just the thought process, right? Maybe your evidence-based program lasts 12 weeks, and that the idea, the format is that one therapist meets with a small group of clients, maybe an average of 6 per meeting. And then you're thinking, okay, what's a reasonable number of therapists at my agency? Maybe therapists who already exist, or a reasonable, number of groups to be running. All 5 therapists at my agency will be running the program, meaning that for every cycle of the program, for every 12 weeks, we can serve 30 clients. I estimate running the program between 8 and 9 months, or 3 cycles, 36 weeks of the program, and serve a total of 90 clients. So that's kind of your thought process. Obviously, you don't have to detail all that out here. Some of this will get detailed out in the methods section. So you would just write simply something like, we will offer 3 12-week sessions serving up to 30 clients per session and up to 90 clients total. Here's another estimation example. Every year at Turning Point, approximately 50 of our 75 youth have some court involvement. Our workshops will also be available to any guardians of youth involved in the court system in Larimer and Weld counties, which is approximately blank youth a year. We anticipate enough interest to serve 20 parents and guardians at each of our 3 workshops, or 60 parents and guardians total. Okay, and then you also need to talk about your recruitment and waitlist strategies. So can you serve everyone in your eligible population during the first year? Then yes, you don't need a wait list. You do still need to talk about how you will recruit or screen participants. Even if you're just asking teachers to identify students in their classroom who meet these criteria, and contacting parents and getting kids enrolled, right? Or maybe you're needing to advertise in the community or with other programs or on social media. If, let's say, you make your program more narrow, right, only kids who have ADHD, and you don't get very many people to sign up, maybe you should expand the eligibility to any kids who are struggling with, self-regulation issues, right? If you're in the other situation where you couldn't serve everyone who is eligible, how will you decide in terms of enrollment? Will it just be first come, first serve? Will you prioritize based on some sort of demographic criteria, like lower income first? Will you use a wait list, right? What's your over-recruitment strategy? Will you put them on a wait list? Will you refer them to other programs that are available? Will you offer them another service? So here's an outline of potential kind of key information for a target population. Adults living over the age of 65, living within city limits, identifying as homebound or a similar obstacle, current depressive symptoms or a diagnosis of clinical depression, and those who are, this is the exclusion criteria, not currently getting treatment for clinical depression. And this gives a little bit more information. We will offer the PEARLS program for individuals 65 or older who are homebound and report current depressive symptoms in Larimer County. We have an estimated blank homebound older adults, and approximately blank percentage are likely experiencing depressive symptoms. In addition, older adults who are not homebound but are experiencing significant obstacles in engaging social or physical activities are also invited to participate. The PEARLS program lasts for 8 weeks and involves weekly in-home sessions. We will offer this program 4 times during the 2020 calendar year and expect to serve 50 adults with each round of the program. We will recruit through physicians' offices, and registration will be on a first-come, first-served basis for applicants that meet the program qualifications. A wait list will be started once all 4 sessions of the program are filled. Given the demand for this program, we will not be able to accept adults who are already involved in regular treatment for depression or other mental health concerns. Here's the resources for the target population that you might have handy. Again, the course workbook, sample proposals, proposal checklist. That library's handout on finding local stats can come in handy here. Referring back to your agency investigation worksheets to figure out, who your population serves, maybe how many. For referring back to your evidence-based program investigation worksheets to think about, the length of the program, how many can be served, and filling in the gaps with any community contact interviews that you have done or are doing to kind of fill in necessary information here.